Tonight will be about change and about hope. I'm very glad you are here. It's a small group of people, but that is also the message of this book, written by Barbara Kump and her co-author, Babette Julia Brinkman, with a small droplet. It begins small, but it will become a huge wave. That's the take-home message of this book, amongst others. We will discuss what we, you and I, can do to make the place where we study or where we work more sustainable. You all know the concept of the footprint, of the carbon footprint. And personally, this concept gives me the feeling that I don't do enough to protect, to save this planet. Our speaker, Barbara Kump, comes with another concept, our handprint. A way for change our work or study place bit by bit. She wrote this book, The Green Handprint at Work, How to be an Employee or Student Activist for Sustainability. You can buy the book if you want to after this lecture. And it was launched very recently. Last Thursday in London, there was a party, a big party. I saw the pictures. And I browsed this book this afternoon, and it's like a blueprint how to change organizations from within. It also gives inspirational stories about how to tackle problems or challenges. Barbara Kump is Associate Professor of Business and Sustainability at the University of Twente. And before I give you the floor, I would like to thank the study associations, Sirius and Ockham, but I don't think they are here tonight, but they supported this event and asked us to organize this event. But I think maybe they are dancing outside this room at this moment. And the Climate Center. 3 groups who support this evening. Please give a warm welcome to Barbara Kump.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here, very excited to be in this nice room. And yeah, tonight I'll talk a bit about, as Hisk already said, about our book, which is called The Green Handprint at Work, How to be an Employee Activist for Sustainability, which I've written together with Babette Julia Brinkman, who is a professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Cologne. And I'd like to start with a story of how I came to write this book. So I grew up, that's a photo of me in 1984, so you can do the math, on Easter, so I was not always dressed like that, but that's how I grew up in Austria, in Graz, or a little bit outside of Graz, and you see the chickens in the garden. That was my grandmother's vegetable garden. I grew up very close to nature with all the plants, all the vegetables, flowers, and also a few animals, as you can see. So that was always very close to my heart, to be in nature. And a couple of years later, I found myself to be a business researcher, studying organizational change processes. And I was still environmentally conscious in my private life, so I cared about what I eat and how I travel and what I wear and all that. So that was still very important to me. But in 2019, and I think it was related to Greta Thunberg and her movement, I started asking myself, so how could I overlook my own work when thinking about my environmental impact? Because I was working with cement companies, I was working sometimes even with defense and stuff like that, and I started to reflect, what am I doing here? And I made a decision back then, and I said, okay, either I can find a way to dedicate everything I do with my research and my teaching to sustainability, and to help make a change, or I will quit and look for a better way to do that. And today, I would say 90% of my research and teaching is dedicated to making a contribution to sustainability. So I feel it could even be a bit more, but at least I found ways to do things and to help catalyze change in class and also with, for example, this book. So I'm not sure how familiar what your background is and how familiar you are with the topic of sustainability. So why did I even think working on sustainability was relevant? So most likely I'm preaching to the choir here. And also I'm a little bit nervous now because I saw people from the Climate Center here. So I show you a few data. So it's really just a very brief introduction to why change is really needed. But I'll start with more safe terrain here. This is a study from the World Economic Forum. They do a risk report every year, the global risk report, asking business leaders what they consider the greatest challenges. And they ask on the left-hand side for short-term risks, on the right-hand side they plot the long-term risks or mid-term for 10 years or so, and they are color-coded. And the takeaway from this slides, it's a lot on there, but the takeaway is that even for those business people, 5 out of 10 risks, as you can see in the green colors, are climate-related, environment-related risks. So starting with extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, and so forth. So these, even business people consider these to be our top risks. More in the science domain, very prominently, researchers at the Stockholm Resilience Center a couple of years ago, it says 2009, came up with this concept of planetary boundaries, starting from the idea that our resources are not unlimited. Things like fresh water, things like biodiversity, things like CO2 in the atmosphere are, they have limits and we should not exceed them, otherwise very bad and unwanted things might happen. And the green is where they are still in the zone of where it's okay, and the more red it gets, the less desirable, I would say. So here is the figure from 2023, where you see that back then 9 boundaries were assessed and 6 were already crossed. There is a more recent figure from 2024. The message here is that we are crossing and have crossed planetary boundaries related, as I said, to CO2 and biodiversity and fresh water. This is actually a rather old figure already that shows the deforestation and loss of biodiversity on land, and you see that especially in those areas here, we have lost a lot of forest already, mainly due to cattle and soy production. It doesn't look much better if you look into marine ecosystems. So this is a map that shows the stress that oceans are exposed to, and here you see, especially around the big harbors, ports, around where the ships are, that there is a lot of stress. The darker the red is, the more stress, and you see that also 98% of oceans are really, or have been already back then, stressed by these multiple problems. Also, human-induced climate change is happening. This is a meta-study from, sorry, I forgot the journal, Environmental Research Letters, I think, that says there is consensus of nearly 100% amongst climate experts that climate change, human-induced climate change, is a fact. And then some people might say, yeah, but it's not 100%, it's only nearly 100%, but this is really as close or as certain as it gets in science. This is a graph from the IPCC report showing areas where global warming has already been measured, and this is basically everywhere we see that climate change has occurred already. Looking at the Netherlands, also the pattern is clear here. Heat or temperatures are rising since the 1980s very clearly. Also extreme weather events in the Netherlands are increasing. And in our region here, it's in particular extreme rain, drought, and heat stress. So a lot of reasons why caring about sustainability, working towards increased sustainability is important. So that was a bit the background why I personally felt there was nothing more important than this to work on. And many people feel the same or feel the pressure to do something about it. But when you ask them, so what are you doing about sustainability? Most people first think of their carbon footprint. So they think about where they travel, what they eat, what they wear, as I did also back then. And we all know how we can improve our carbon footprints. For example, we could upgrade our light bulbs, that would improve it already a little bit. We could wash our clothes with cold water, that would have a little bit more impact already. Switch to a plant-based diet, live car-free. All these things we know what we should do. And as Hiska also said, for most people that creates also a lot of guilt. So there is a very interesting study that identified 8 different forms of eco-guilt, starting from I don't act sustainably enough myself, I did so much harm in the past, and one of my favorites, I feel guilty that I even exist because I create stress for the environment. And this carbon footprint is really widespread. And that is not a coincidence. It is actually, many people know that already, but it's actually due to a PR campaign by BP, who started to think about, okay, how can we improve our own image and shift the blame to the people who consume and thereby create those CO2 emissions. So saying, okay, we only produce it, but you create the CO2. So that's really this idea of shifting the burden to others by the fossil fuel industry here. In fact, most environmental harm happens through business organizations. And I'm saying here through business organizations because I want to highlight that I don't blame business organizations in that sense, because they do it only because of our consumption patterns, of our life standards, of our needs, and so on and so forth. But still, businesses and business organizations are the site of where much harm happens, of where landfill is created large scale, of where emissions happen, of where wastewater is leaked into rivers, and where deforestation happens. So businesses are really a main part of the problem. So they also need to be part of the solution. But then, again, when you talk to people who are not the CEOs of these businesses, they usually say, oh, there is not so much I can do. Policymakers have to make a change. My top managers have to change. And this was exactly the starting point where Babette and I started to wanted to try to give a different message. And for the rest of the talk, I would like to introduce our 3 takeaway messages that we want to make with the book. And the first message is, your handprint matters. So everybody is aware of the footprint, but we didn't invent the term, but we really want to use the term the green handprint at work to highlight is really about the contribution you make to sustainability through decisions and actions you take at your workplace and in your communities, and like business organizations, but can also be university, for example. So rather than always feeling guilty about what we eat and how we travel and so forth, is really, so I'm not saying that's not important, but it's really, in many cases, even more important what we do with our hands every day, the decisions we make, the actions we take. And also, in large companies, that's also why our handprint really matters. Even if companies commit to sustainability and change their practices and so forth, it is not normally top managers who have that idea first. Usually it's employees or middle managers who champion certain issues and what that could be, I'll come to that, and then try to lobby that internally. And once momentum has been created, then top management says, okay, let's grow that, let's scale it, and let's do something about it. But very often, these are bottom-up campaigns that need to be brought to top management, who says then, okay, there seems to be a good reason to do this. The second takeaway message is, you can make a change from wherever you are. For the book, we talked to, let's say, 25-ish people who told us their stories about how they changed their companies from within. And these were quite famous people. Maybe some of you have seen the shopping conspiracy. No. Now I forgot the name, but it's on Netflix with Maren Costa. So Maren Costa gave us a couple of interviews for the book. She used to work for Amazon and organized a large strike, which at the end then pushed Amazon to make a climate pledge. We have talked to Drew Wilkinson, who was at Microsoft and co-founded together with Holly Alpine several thousand people climate community that was really successful and made a lot of change at Microsoft. So we have those big examples and big names, but we also talk to people, and these are of course not their real photos, but project managers, paralegals, engineers, human resource managers who made changes at their company. For example, a project manager at a software service company started to think about, okay, what is actually the main impact my company has? And he realized that it was for them business flights. So he started to get all his facts straight and convinced his manager to change the policy for short distance flights so that they would from then on be encouraged, not forced, but encouraged to really take the train for short distances, for example. Or with an engineer that was, by the way, an alumnus from the University of Twente, who in his company really tried to promote circular materials in the health tech company he was working at. So he really framed that as innovation and gradually changed how the products were created there. So a lot of these examples, and we give many little snippets of stories in the book to illustrate how things can be done. And I really like this quote also by Eugene Kirpichov from Google, who is now head of the, let's call it even movement, work on climate. And he says, climate leaders are people who don't wait for somebody to ask them to do things, but people who go and push for changes that would not have happened if it were not for them. So the idea is really whatever you can do to make a change is something that happens because of you and would not have happened if you wouldn't have taken action. And that also brings me to the third takeaway message, which is a bit longer message, so I'll talk a little bit more about this. It's really about acting. And that's also why we stayed with the term employee activist, although we debated that a lot, because people not always like to be called an employee activist, because the associations you have with activists is that these are people on the streets and clashing with the police and fighting and shouting and being antagonistic. But we deliberately still chose the term because we said employee activists are people who are committed to environmental issues and who are not the final decision makers, but believe that their management doesn't do enough or is not acting fast enough to address environmental issues. And so they want to take matters in their own hands and they want to make a change. And that can take all kinds of shapes. So what we actually tried to do is to rebrand employee activism as a positive term to describe someone who wants to be active for sustainability. This action, and that's our, let's say, theory of change, often takes the shape of first really doing a lot of invisible groundwork, preparing, spreading ideas, building networks. And we borrow here from Rebecca Solnit's term or description of mushrooming. So she describes that many large-scale changes that seem like they happened overnight were really like mushrooms that suddenly appear after rain, were really long in the making. So many people worked towards this change, worked together, created alternatives, created infrastructure, so change could then happen when the time was ripe. And that's really the first thing I want to, the first, let's say, strategy I want to highlight is really about forming those networks and not so much thinking about immediate outcomes, but being aware that every step we make can help build that network. The second, or actually let's say next to the general theory of change, the most important thing that we heard from people is really don't do it alone. So whoever we asked, the first thing they said, look for someone to fight together or to work together, because you can give each other hope, you can split the burden, you can be creative together. So really build a team. Also, some people from the more antagonistic end of the spectrum we spoke to, like Maren Costa, for example, from Amazon, said safety comes in numbers. It's much easier to get rid of one person or silence them. But if you're like 5 or 6, or maybe later even a larger number of people, that becomes much easier. So it's really also about being safe and not exposing yourself too much, but be part of a group. Another thing that is really important is before you start, ideally, understand power dynamics. And power can take very different shapes in organizations. Of course, it's on one side the official power, which you can find in the organizational chart. So who is the CEO, who is the person I need to talk to, officially, who is the gatekeeper of something. But of course, there is a lot of informal power, like who are the people who then really make the decisions. So here you can, for example, some of our people we spoke to really sit there and then draw sociograms. So who is working with whom and who is having their yoga class together, stuff like that. So really to try to understand how decisions are being made. And next to these people-related aspects of power, so who is making which decision, there is also something which is called the dominant logic of an organization. So what is relevant? What is prioritized? What is the organization's mission? And Hiska asked me to give a couple of examples that are also about the university here. So, for example, what is our mission? What are the arguments that count here? What are informal rules? So is it if we get funding, then we can do something? Is it if it will help us with the ranking? Is that something that is something that is encouraged? These kinds of things, right? How is the organization making decisions and what is rewarded also? I'll come back to that a bit later. Another important point is choose your battles. Employee activism, so you are really in for the long game if you want to try to change your organization from within. And the question is where to start and then how to proceed. And one thing that makes sense to consider is really what is your organization's main impact? And in the context of a university, that is not normally the canteen food. It's normally not even the business flights, the conference trips we make, but it's, in my opinion, really our core business of what we teach to students of future generations, what we do research about, who we do research with, and so forth. So that is really where we as a university have the main impact. So that is something to consider. I'm not necessarily saying go for that, but it's interesting and relevant to reflect on that. Where do we have the biggest impact also? The second aspect is then what is your main concern, right? You need a lot of motivation, you need to stay motivated over a long time. So it's really, you need to look for something that is also really close to your heart. So is it trash? Is it CO2? Is it, energy saving? So what is it really that you would like to put your energy into? And the third aspect that is also relevant here is to consider the level of risk you want to take. People told us, or we also saw that in our data and in our stories, that there are very different levels of risk you can take. So, for example, suggesting an improvement in a lecture is probably very low risk, whereas demanding a new chair for sustainability and really also fighting for that. Might be there, you might expose yourself a bit more by tying yourself in front of the cafeteria as a professor to demand vegan food is probably even more risky for you as a researcher to do. And it's also really the level of risk you would like to take at this point in your life. This also depends on your private situation, your job alternatives, and so forth. So these are all things to consider when choosing your battles. And what is also related there, you can start focusing on very different areas. And this is related to what I said on the previous slide with the organization's main impact. But it's also a bit related to it's actually related to all of the three things, right? So it's related to your concern as well as the level of risk. Because, for example, when I said before, convincing someone to change a lecture at the university, that would be here. So the university's services are delivering teaching, for example, and changing a lecture would fall into this category. And if you do that in a very constructive way, that is related to low risk. But you could also try to change the organization's mission and strategy by trying to intervene directly in the strategy process. For example, trying to convince management to become the most sustainable university in the Netherlands, or trying to convince them to really only work with partners for funding, for example, who also commit to sustainability. So that would be in this category here. I already mentioned teaching here as services, but also, for example, the types of research projects we look for, the types of grants we try to get in our research would also be part of our products and services as researchers at the university. Processes and infrastructure, that is how those products and services are created. For example, the canteen or the business travel would fall into that category. So you could try to improve that. And the finances, that's an interesting one, because there is a lot to be shifted if people move their finances, on not just individuals, but large organizations like ours, shift their finances to more sustainable bank accounts, for example. So just our normal account as a university, if we could shift that to a sustainable account, that could already make quite some impact in our CO2 emissions, depending on where the bank we are currently having our accounts is investing their money. But it's not only about where the university's money is, for example, lying, but it's also the pension funds we choose. That can make a difference if we decide to choose for pension funds that are only sustainable and don't invest, for example, in fossil fuels. But it's also the other way around, which is again related to our mission and strategy. From whom do we take money? So who funds us, right? So these types of things. These are all areas where you could try to intervene. And there are also other areas of, as well. Wherever you start, the general strategy is to start small and grow it from there. If your first attempt is successful, you can try to increase the gentle or not so gentle pressure. If it's unsuccessful, you could try something different and say, oh, we committed to sustainability and now we tried to arrange this little sustainability event, but it didn't work, so maybe we need to double down on our sustainability efforts. So you can work slowly and steadily with something like a salami tactic to increase the changes you're trying to make. And that's why it's also interesting to look at classic, quick and easy wins, which normally in many organizations we spoke to, or people we spoke to told us that in their organizations it was often either the canteen food or the trash, because someone said trash is really the gateway drug. People see trash lying around, people don't like trash, so that's normally an easy win to get your managers buy-in to reducing trash. But it's important to, even if you choose for those quick wins, be strategic and keep the big picture in mind. So it's important that quick wins can increase motivation, but that you don't only focus on the small stuff and don't get distracted by that, but still think about, okay, what is actually the larger goal I want to achieve here? So is it really, do I want to end with the canteen, or is it actually really the mission of the university, for example, that I want to change, or the climate, that they have a climate pledge, for example. So the small initiatives can be stepping stones, but it's important to build on them and not lose sight of them. Another thing related to strategy is really also to link your initiatives to the company's or organization's strategy as much as you can. And that's why it's also, even though it might only look like a piece of paper, but it's very helpful if you can convince your organization to have a climate pledge or have a mission statement where they say they are sustainable. Because then you can, whatever you do, link to that document and say, okay, but you wrote it down, so now we also have to deliver on that. So, and ideally also always use the wording of your company. So if they call it their net zero 2050 strategy, then stick to that. Don't be too picky. We had before the conversation, it's important also to be pragmatic with those things in order to convince people. But it's not only being strategic, but also being entrepreneurial. So being entrepreneurial means to use what you have and do what you can. So use your skills to, for example, to give my personal example, I happen to have a lot of knowledge about change processes, so I'm trying to help people make changes. Other people might have climate knowledge, so they might bring in that in conversations where decisions are being made and stuff like that. But it's also, there are plenty of committees and working groups in, for example, this university, but also in other organizations. You can say, oh yeah, I want to be part of this strategy development group, or I want to be part of this curriculum redesign to bring this perspective in. So to really be creative where you can bring in your perspective. And the second point here is also seize opportunities for change, but maybe you can also create them by making a suggestion. Oh, why don't we do this climate day here? Or why don't we participate in the, I was talking this afternoon with a couple of colleagues who want to make an employee action day. So why don't we participate in the employee action day? Or why don't we create a new minor, for example, that is about that topic, and so forth. So it's really not just about seizing opportunities, but also about creating opportunities. Then, and that is actually the first chapter we wrote in the book, at one point you will meet people who have to make the decisions. So by definition, as an employee activist, you are not the final decision maker, but someone else will have to say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's do it, I'll give you the budget, and so forth, or we will change the company in this regard. So it's really important to think about how to convince those people, and it's really important to have strategies on how to talk to them. And we give, as I said, we dedicate the whole chapter to that, especially to the question of how to sell your sustainability issue, for example, to someone who is not convinced that climate change exists yet, or to someone who believes that climate change is relevant, but maybe not as relevant as they say in on TV all the time, or someone who says, yeah, it is relevant and probably it's also necessary, but we are not the ones who need to make a change or who can make a change. So all kinds of situations that need different arguments on how to convince your managers. Also, we discuss that is really important to combine facts about what's going on with stories about what would be implications of not acting. For example, some told us that they were able to convince their managers by talking about the situation that one manager's daughter decided not to have children because of the climate situation, and the manager was then very open to sustainability arguments because she was very sad that she would never be a grandmother, for example. So then that was a very good starting point for the activists to say, I have an idea of how we can improve things in our company. But that's a very different situation from someone who says, well, I don't care about all of this. My goal is to have a good bottom line here. That person needs very different types of arguments. And that we discuss, and we also give the hint that you should not focus too much on climate deniers, because if they really deny the situation, then it's often not possible to convince them with facts for all kinds of reasons. Then, as Hiska said at the beginning, the idea is really to start small and to see how things can ripple. And one thing is really try to expand your movement within your organization by building something where everyone can contribute to, at every level of risk, also at zero risk, right? Whatever you do, you might need people who help you collect some facts, or who help to distribute the message, or who do things where they don't have to be exposed at all. And they also should have, so it's also helpful if they can have a place in your initiatives. So it's good to think about how can we create something where as many people as possible can buy into. Also important, try to make yourself redundant. So it's never a good idea that things only exist because of you. But it's always good to think about, okay, who could, if I step down, who could take this over? This is important to both shift the burden, also removing the pressure from yourself, but also to avoid the risk that if you step out, that the whole thing will collapse. So Drew Wilkinson, for example, said when he left his large community in Microsoft, that was actually the greatest gift or reward for him, to see that he walked out and the thing continued. It just continued. So people were sad that he was leaving, but the movement, stayed alive without him. And another thing related to expanding your influence is also to expand beyond your own organization, so not just growing within the organization, but also expanding to, for example, other employee activists at other organizations, or start collaborating with NGOs, maybe with people at your suppliers who also are employee activists at their organizations, and so forth, to really increase the impact. For example, Eugene Krupchikov, which I was not able to pronounce before, still not able to pronounce it very well, he told me that they are currently building in the Bay Area a network of, or they're trying to build a network of regenerative businesses, so where they really try to change an entire industry by working across company boundaries to make the movement bigger. Another thing to expand your influence in a little bit of a different way, or to increase the pressure, is by becoming more antagonistic. So here is the example of Amazon, where they organized a walkout in 2019 that pushed Amazon to sign their climate pledge back then, which ended then with the 2 employees who organized it being laid off, and they had then this big lawsuit. They settled, I think, at the end, or I know they settled at the end. But that was, of course, a very extreme measure. Similarly, Googlers who have been walking out for a couple of issues. We just touched that a bit in the book to argue that that's also an option, but there are many, many, many other things you can do before becoming antagonistic. So there is a lot of things that can be done in a very constructive way. And the last thing is try to do all that while not burning out. So one important thing is to create a good enough mindset. The climate crisis is huge. You will never be, nobody of us individually or together in this room, for example, will be able to solve it. And it's always important to keep that in mind. So we can only do as much as we can, and it's also important to stay healthy to do that. And that's why it's also very important to look for social support. So there's people who organize across organizations to build employee support networks. And if it's too unpleasant, or if you really feel you cannot make a change anymore, leaving is also an option, right? So that's also something. It could even be, but doesn't have to be, but can even be a form of activism. I'm currently doing a study on climate quitting, where we study people who decided not to be active and voice their concerns anymore, but decided to leave for various reasons, because either the dissonance became too strong. That happens often, for example, in the oil industry again. There is this beautiful group at the moment forming, which is called Life After Oil, where former oil employees start to share their stories, why they stepped out at the end. The second is that they find better alternatives to feed their families. And the third one is that they lose hope that they can make a change within their organization. So if, for whatever reason, employee activism is not feasible anymore, then leaving is an option and can be even a form of activism if you, for example, write a LinkedIn post, like Caroline Dennett, who wrote this LinkedIn post after she left BP. Sorry, please don't quote me. I think it was BP that made a lot of waves, where she described that she couldn't work for the company anymore because the dissonance between what they were saying that they do became too strong. So this is the summary of the takeaway messages: build a team, understand and utilize power dynamics, choose your battles, be strategic and entrepreneurial, persuade decision makers, expand your influence both within and beyond your organization, and try not to burn out with all that. And there is one slide I'd like to show my students, business students, why it makes also sense for companies to become more sustainable. It's because incentives to become more sustainable are really increasing. So there are carrots and sticks for organizations. Customer demands are changing. Younger customers are really demanding more and more often that companies are environmentally friendly. More environmentally friendly products and services may open up new markets. It's the public image and legitimacy of a company, especially when it comes to employer attractivity. People are more and more sensitive to who they work for, and don't necessarily want to work for companies that pollute. On the sticks side, legislation is changing more and more. There are increasing lawsuits where activists or other parties are really suing companies, and they also often win. So in order to avoid bad reputation or lawsuits, it's also a good idea to become more sustainable, also because there is a lot of external and sometimes also destructive activism, such as sabotage, and investors are then withdrawing if that happens. So overall, a lot of reasons for companies to become more sustainable. And coming back to this topic of guilt at the beginning, I really like this quote that a vibrant, fair and regenerative future is possible not when thousands of people do climate justice activism perfectly, but when millions of people do the best they can. And that's bringing me back to the summary of takeaway messages. So our handprint really matters more than our footprint. We can make a change from wherever we are in our organization, and it's really about getting active. And I'd like to close with the last sentence of the book also. And who knows, by leaving a green handprint at our workplaces, we might eventually change the world one organization at a time. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bravo. You gave much practical information in a very short amount of time.
That's also what we do in the book.
Yes.
Short amount of pages, a lot of...
We agreed that I would ask you some questions before I give you the opportunity. And my first question is about the companies you describe in this book. They are business companies, so they are money-driven. What's the difference with the university, with our university?
Well, I think the main difference is really when it comes to persuading decision makers. So it's so what I said is really when you try to persuade decision makers, you need to find arguments, and I like to believe still, although I'm working at universities for many years already, that universities are not only driven by profit motives, but that there are other arguments also, like excellence, like rankings maybe, which are of course related to money at the end of the day. But you probably have to link your arguments more closely to the organization, to the university's targets. If you talk to business managers, then it's really often the bottom line. It's really often, okay, how does that relate to profit? What does it cost us? What do we earn? And I think that in a university context, that type of argument is a bit different in the sense that, okay, what does it help us to become more prestigious? Does it help us with the rankings? Will it help us to attract students? Which at the end of the day is also about money, let's say, but at least it's not that direct a link. So I think the main difference is really with how to persuade decision makers.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And about the decision makers, you refer to our, how do you call it in English, college van bestuur, our executive board, or to other parties as well?
Well, at the end, to the executive board, of course, but it depends, right? Whoever has the budget. So so it's really about the area of responsibility of the decision maker, right? So there are many things. Or I said now budget again, but because I was in the business logic.
Yes, because I was thinking budget.
No, but who has the right? So there are organizational units, and all the decisions that fall within that organizational unit that don't have to go higher up. Those are the final decision makers, right? So
Okay,
those are
but
the
for
people you have
example,
to
the
convince.
university council, is that also a party which is important
Probably it is, but I would
for
say
change?
that. Yeah, certainly it is, but of course I think the executive board in our case is probably the main address.
Okay, you work here at the University of Twente for 3 years now. Are we also mushrooming? Are some people mushrooming the university?
Well, I think that there are a couple of initiatives that take place.
Which initiatives?
Well, all kinds of initiatives, I think, around the climate center. Now the people here trying to bring people together to connect their research with sustainability goals, but also with talking to stakeholders and bringing really also society in, right? So to open up the university to societal stakeholders who want to change their companies, so we can really also share our knowledge, not just with students, but also with people who need that knowledge in order to make a change. And I think there is a lot going on. I mean, I pointed now to climate center people, but there is a lot of other stuff going on where people who have that mission, who want to make the society more sustainable, are trying to create those initiatives. There are also initiatives, for example, that were started by the Green Hub to give the university a sustainability definition. It was a rather lengthy process, and
yes, I know.
Yeah,
with some badges, the gold badge and the silver badge. Yes,
something like that. So there were a couple of initiatives, but I think that altogether we could do better. So that we could do even more to make our university as a whole more sustainable.
Because what I saw, you mentioned the Green Hub. I saw that the Green Hub was a very big group of people, of students and employees. And then the budget cuts came 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And the Green Hub started to shrink. And it has almost disappeared.
Yeah, true. But that was due to the budget cuts. I think before that they were actually quite active.
But are they underground now? Because I have to have a little bit of hope. Are they mushrooming right now?
I think not, to be honest. I don't think so.
But do you have a clear view of the initiatives which are going on at the University of Twente and which I don't see anymore?
No, I didn't inventorize them. So we really looked with the book mainly into business organizations and many. So that's also my field of expertise, right?
Yes,
companies.
I know. Yes.
I was involved in some of the initiatives, but to be honest, I didn't inventorize the stuff that was going on at the university. But to be sure, while writing this book, I was reflecting many times, so I should, when it's done, go back to those initiatives and try to help catalyze that.
Yes, because you are teaching sustainability and change, and you are writing a book about it. But are you an employee activist yourself?
Well, I think I'm trying to be in a very gentle one, to be honest, also at the moment. I was involved in the group that was trying to build that committee. Now, let's see how people react to that. But that was trying to get evaluation of projects with the industry partners, right?
Yes.
That we have this, I think it was established and then it was closed down again, but we were really trying to set up criteria, what would be at least good questions to reflect on when working with industry partners.
Yes.
So that there was part of, for example, I was also part of this sustainability definition initiative. I have started now to help in the Climate Center with those societal initiatives to think about ways to bring people in and so forth, and to help also connect researchers across faculties who also have some knowledge about change processes and transition processes, to bring them together also with climate researchers, so we can help society better to change. So these types of initiatives. But I think that the Green Hub, to come back to that, was really a bit, due to the budget cuts, really a bit, dismantled is a hard word, but yeah.
You mentioned in your lecture, choose your battles wisely.
Yeah.
And then you said something about the defense. Yeah. Which research are we doing, and which education do we give to our students?
Yeah.
Why did you mention defense? Don't you agree with scientists doing research for defense, which is a trend right now?
No, I definitely don't. I wouldn't say I don't agree with scientists doing defense. That's a very personal opinion, but I think defense is important, and I'm basically not disagreeing with scientists who do any type of science. So I think science should be free, and scientists should be able to choose what they do research on, because it's not the science that creates the problems necessarily, but people who use the findings in a non-responsible way. So it was just my own reflection about, I had worked with cement industry and defense industry and stuff like that, and I was realizing, is that the type of organization that I want to help, and those types of how to optimize cement production, is that really what I want to support now? And I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, and I don't necessarily say that people should not do that, but I felt back then I actually want to do something else, and I want to make a contribution to something else. So that was the main argument. Yeah.
Okay. One personal question: you really dig into changing processes. Do you also apply them to your personal life? If you want to change something in your personal life, do you use your own concepts, your own theories, your own strategies?
I'm thinking about the question a bit, because it's really for organizational change. So
I know.
Yeah.
It's the big picture.
Yeah. I mean, personally, that's funny that you say it, because just like half an hour ago, a friend called me to say, oh, I was talking about you with my daughter, and then she said, oh, then Barbara is really personifying change, right? So I think I personally have changed a lot. So that was unrelated, but it's funny that you say that now. So because I'm a trained psychologist, and then I worked in IT, and then I changed again to, or I transitioned, let's say, into organizational research, and then I transitioned into this more organizational and sustainability domain. And then, I mean, also an academic career is a constant change, right? You move from one city to the other, and then a couple of years ago I came to the Netherlands. So I personally have changed a lot, and I also like change, so I do embrace change. If I apply it, probably I do, because the theories and concepts are, coming out of me. So I think that's how I think about change. I'm not sure I would now read the book and apply them in hindsight to the change, but I think more it's like grown out of my experience with change and what I put into the book, I would say, but that's, I have to think about this question a bit longer.
Maybe an example, you went to London last week for the book launch. Did you go by train?
Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would never take the plane?
Well, I do fly sometimes, but this is a no-brainer to go to London by train. Yeah.
Yes,
so
because it's
Yeah. No,
I
also
understand.
I go 4 or 5 times per year to Austria, and that's also so. What is doable by train, I do. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't. Yeah. Just as an example, so I very rarely still fly, but I'm very conscious about. Yeah. We also maybe because you asked, we had this also nice story. We had this. Conference trip in 2023, I guess it was, where we wanted to make an example of going to a scientific conference by sailboat. And the
by sailboat?
Yeah.
Where was
I have to
the
say
conference?
we were just, it was in Cagliari. And we went from Naples to Cagliari. So I took the train from here. So you told me you're going to Italy yourself. So
I'm going to Venice by train.
Right?
Yes, 24
and I went
hours
all
tomorrow.
the way to Bologna by train, and then to Naples, and then from Naples to Cagliari with the sailboat, which is a 4-day trip there, and I think 7-day trip we took on, because we wanted to make this statement of going to a conference sustainably, and it would be, we would sit there under the stars in nature and talk about science and
then
make
you
new
became
connections.
seasick.
Yeah, you guess it. I am not a big sailor, but I signed up for this adventure, and not only did we get seasick, and I was not really much,
it was just a joke.
No, many people, so we were 10, and 3 became seriously seasick.
Oh, okay.
Also, we had to face wind. I mean, some people are probably sailors here, so we couldn't really sail there, so we had to use the motor most of the time.
Yes.
So we produced so much CO2 that everyone could have flown from Naples to Cagliari. And then also there were a couple of vegans on board, and the skipper was Italian, and he was fishing, and we had agreed in advance, there would be a vegan diet on board, but he would be able to fish because that's what he does. And then, I'm from Austria, and for me the fish is dead, right? So I'm not used to big fish, and he's fish tuna fish. And I don't know if you know tuna fish, but this is that
they are
type
huge.
Of fish. Yeah.
Yes.
And then he was gutting it, and there was the blood and the gore everywhere, and all the vegans really were very unhappy about it. So this whole sustainability initiative, where we try to be very sustainable, became a drama.
Yes.
And we at the end wrote a paper about it. Of course, that's what we do. And the paper is about how you envision a beautiful utopia, and then what happens when you really try to embody it. And then it's a very abstract paper. But it's about the sailing trip.
Yes.
So that was a long answer to if it's.
But it was a very beautiful answer. One question to go back to your lecture. You were talking about eco-guilt.
Yeah.
And then you said that you really liked the last one.
I was cynical, of course.
The cynical. Oh yes. Okay. That was cynical. Okay. No. Okay. That was. I feel guilty that I exist. So I'm glad it's cynical.
I'm glad you asked, so maybe someone else.
Yes, maybe. Do you have any questions to Barbara? I will put on the mic so I can come to you. If you raise your hand, I can. Yes, it's on.
Can also be a comment.
Yes, I will go to you.
Question is, I'm not. It's not very clear to me where the limit is between handprint and footprint. Can you a little bit explain?
Yeah. So it's is there a clear limit? So the footprint is really the unintentional things we leave, or traces or damages we do while just living, right? Or while maintaining our lifestyle, while consuming, while. So it's the unintended side effects, more or less. So you have the calculator. So okay, I'm flying, and then I produce that amount of CO2 and so forth. So that's really what you leave unintentionally. And with the handprint, we want to coin or not coined, but we built on that notion that it's really also about what you actively do, where you can make a decision, where you can make a choice, where you can, for example, decide, in case of the university again, what you teach. You can decide what you research, who you collaborate with. You can, these types of things. So where you really can, at your area of action, can make a different choice in that sense. Yeah, is it clear now?
Mm-hmm. And I liked the story you told, and not everybody knows, about BP coining this phrase, giving us guilt, and the idea that we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, because the problem is so huge that, you know, me not flying anymore will not solve it.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah.
It's rather depressing. Next question.
Hello. I wanted to understand what you actually do. You talk to individual people, you talk to companies, right?
Yeah.
To commercial companies, to NGOs, right? Also, you talk to profit-minded organizations and non-profit-minded organizations.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
And what's the difference with those people? Do you have success with one group more than the other? Is your focus mainly on individual responsibilities with your book, or is your main target to talk to companies and groups of people?
Yeah, thanks. If I understand your question correctly, is who is the address, like the person I'm addressing, is that right? Or the entity I'm addressing? So with the book, we are really addressing employees who want to make a change. So the starting point of our journey with the book was really, amongst others, these Deloitte studies that say that young people don't want to work for unsustainable companies anymore, and they have numbers like up to 50 people, and they want to make a change, and they don't know how. So we said, okay, if there are so many people who want to do that, let's give them something in the shape of the book as a service to them, that they don't have to read all those theories we work with. So that was the starting point. And then we realized that they don't exist in masses, that actually people don't even consider that they could change their handprint, and that became a bit the mission with the book. So the book is really targeting those people, but I also have research on how to change, how to use, which arguments would change managers' opinions. For example, the paper is, I think, called "How do threats change managers' opinions?" or under which circumstances are threats effective or not. So that really looks into convincing managers. Then I have worked on the question more generally of organizational change and the complexities of organizational change, which really looks more at the organization as a whole, as an entity. The recent study we have published is about the transition pain of, for example, professions, in this case Dutch farmers, that were confronted with new nitrogen regulations, who really had to change their practices, and then became then really had to question, okay, if I have to change again, who am I then still? So what is the role of these changes on the profession of a farmer? So I would say at all levels. So I'm interested really in this question of how do organizations change? How can we change them? How can we change them from within? What happens when pressures from outside go to the university? So my topic is really organizational change, and how to organizational change in the context of sustainability and how to initiate it, I would say. Does that answer?
It sounds very theoretical when you talk about this.
Yeah.
You sit behind the desk and you think about all these things.
Yeah.
But do you actually talk to managers and to
I will take
people? And what is the effect of your do you intervene, or do you advise people?
Well, I'm talking to people who try to change their organizations, and I try to advise them on how to do that in line with the ideas in the books. We talk to employees, okay, how can you do that better? How can we are also very open to building a group of of employees. So if there would be a group of people interested, I'd be very, very happy to work with them and to see if we can, for example, in the Twente region, build a network of people who want to change their companies. That would be very interesting, for example. I have in Austria back then been working with 20-ish, 25, I think, small and medium-sized enterprises to help them change. Back then it was not yet on the topic of sustainability, but we have worked very closely. There was a Hochschule, right, University of Applied Sciences, where we really were working like consultants nearly with those companies, very closely, long-term processes to help them change. Here in the Netherlands, my Dutch is getting better, but so far for those types of consulting projects, I feel that I need to improve my language a bit, but I think it's slowly getting there, and I'm very open also to do that. But back then, back in Austria, I have done that a lot. So I really like to I like to be theoretical, but I also have done that a lot, and I really like getting my hands dirty in the sense of really being on the ground and working with the people.
Could you measure any effect of your interventions or your discussions or your advice?
We didn't try to measure it yet, so I cannot say, okay, if you do this, then this will happen, because it's also very different for organizations.
Would you like to measure before and measure after, and
Yeah.
if it's of any use what you do?
A
Yeah,
question about measurements
Yeah, well,
before and after.
I get it, yeah,
yes.
but I think we. So I
Yes,
think
I'm
it's
just
not that,
for the video.
Also for the people. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. In terms of measuring, I mean, coming back to this mushrooming metaphor, I think that it cannot all be measured what you do, because some things will take time to ripple, right? So for example, tonight, some people might think, oh yeah, actually that's quite interesting. What I heard today, maybe I can bring some of this in my organization tomorrow, and then maybe in 5 years something will happen. So you don't really know. So it's not like I go there and then I instruct people and then they change and then we can measure it.
But you can afterwards you can maybe
Yes.
a questionnaire.
Yeah, that we could do, and that we just one sentence that in the other projects in Austria we also have done that to measure it before and after with the general change capability. So that would make a lot of sense, I guess. Yeah.
There are other questions. I'm coming to you. One question, you are talking a lot about employees, and the book is also about employee activists, but you are also teaching to students.
Yeah.
Are they open to changing our organization?
The university?
Yeah, the students. The students you teach about.
I'm teaching the students more about how they, so my students are business students, and they
Yes.
will all try to be managers and consultants. So what I'm
Yes.
trying to teach them is how to change business organizations when they go out.
When they are
Yes.
ex-students and employees.
Yes.
Okay, I
Which
understand.
they will be very soon. So.
Yes, okay. Over there.
Barbara, I have a question about you suggest getting active. I also want to hear your thoughts about staying active. So now in changing world with certain political leaders,
Yeah.
it's very hard sometimes to stay hopeful
Yeah.
and to stay active. What are your thoughts on that? And do you
Yeah.
have any advice in the book or
Yeah.
outside the book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We have a whole chapter on hope, and interestingly enough, we were writing that up when Trump was voted again into office. So we were like, oh yeah, and tomorrow we will have a new female president in America. And then we woke up and it was really very different. So it came to us really also as a surprise, and we were in the middle of writing up that hope chapter. So we ourselves were really struggling with this question, okay, how can we now still have hope ourselves? How can we keep up the energy for ourselves? And both my co-authors, Babette and Ivy, are both big fans of Rebecca Solnit, who has a whole book which I really recommend. It's called Hope in the Dark, and there she makes the point that hope is not something that comes out of optimism or something, but hope is the idea that change is that things are uncertain, that they are still undecided. So we still there are things that we don't know yet and that we can still create. And if we don't try to change them, things will certainly stay the same. But if we try to change them, then there is the possibility for change. So that is really this idea that that things, can be different again if enough people want them to be different. And it's also based, so in the book we give 3 perspectives on this question of hope. So one is really things have changed in the past. So the biggest example probably is the abolition of slavery, which was a very large-scale change that was also very closely tied to industry interests, and still with enough pressure, people together managed to abolish that, right? So that the things have changed in the past. Even things that were considered impossible to change were considered to be natural orders. And then also there is a lot going on. So it looks a bit dire, but I tried to put it on the last slide. Lawsuits are increasing, regulations are still, they are always again contested, but still getting stricter. There is a market. Look at the electric vehicle market, for example. There is a market trend now that really fuels the electric car industry, even though the regulations in Europe are watered down constantly. But due to the market dynamics with China and so forth, there is a lot of pull to, for example, produce and buy electric vehicles. A similar thing with solar panels and so forth. So these things are really increasing a lot, and a lot is going into the direction it should go when we want to become more sustainable, although there is a lot of backlash and there is a lot to complain and a lot of frustration. But still, things that we can still change and that are still worth trying to change. But it's not easy, right? I keep saying hope is a practice, right? It's an everyday thing to get up and I'll motivate myself again. So it's a very important question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Yeah, right next.
Yes.
You talked about, I think it's a really nice sort of handbook on how to fight or how to get out of that freeze from the footprint idea, and you talked about dominant logics. Do you think that there's an activist logic, and do you have suggestions on how to cultivate that activism or activist logic and make that the dominant logic within an organization?
I have never thought about that, so that's an interesting question. So the idea of the dominant logic is that, maybe I have to elaborate a bit further because I answer, is that every organization started with a purpose and a founder or founding team. And normally this becomes then the DNA of that organization, and that you still find back in how the organization is structured. So for example, if the founding person found design and marketing very important, then there will likely be a design department at the end. If they found, I always like to compare, for example, Microsoft versus Apple, where the product is very similar in its, like in general, but they are very different in what they focus on, which is also related to the idea of the founder. So that is really the starting point, and there are probably logics in organizations that counteract activism, if it's very bureaucratic, if speaking up is prohibited, if there is every decision has to be signed by a couple of people and so forth, that is really inhibiting activism, and cultures where people are encouraged to share their opinion and encouraged to bring their ideas and so forth, that is conducive to what we would call employee activism. If you can, so the recommendation for employee activists is really try to work as much as possible as you can with your existing logic. So try to fight the logic only if you have to. Otherwise, try to find ways to put your arguments in, to make them in line with the decision criteria, to follow the processes, how to get things done in that organization as much as possible, and only try to fight against it where needed. So the question, can you cultivate an activist logic? This is really more for managers, I guess, or for higher up in the hierarchy, because for changing a logic, you really need also top-level decision makers who change the reward structure, so what is rewarded, what is punished, who is hired, who is fired, and stuff like that. But there is research from the other angle, so how to encourage as managers activism, because at the end of the day, it will benefit your organization in the long run also if it becomes more sustainable. At the moment, you probably, as a manager, don't want it because you want to have everything as it is, and change is always costly and difficult and whatever. But in the long run, normally, if employees are not satisfied and they want to change, also the organization will benefit, is the idea. But yeah, it's a complicated, long answer, I'm sorry.
More questions? Yes, of course.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really liked it, and I recognize a lot of what you say also here at the university, so I do think a lot of it is really applicable. Something that I think a lot of people who work at the university also have very analytical minds, right? And so this is challenging, right? Sometimes to say, I don't really know if this is going to work, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm curious about, is there a way that we can bring a little bit more analysis into this, right? So
into what?
Into the decisions that we make. So you had that sort of like the Venn diagram about what the impact really is. And why I say that is I think also a lot of people are really scared about greenwashing, right? So we change to from plastic cups to paper cups. And then we make a big campaign and we say, look how great we are, we changed this thing, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. And then we feel good and then we stop. And so I'm just curious, like, so when you go through these lists and you see, I on the one hand, I fully am on board, right? So I recognize the added value of just doing things because you can and you don't know what's going to happen, you're trying to do those mushrooms. But if you were to say, is there more research that we need to do to be able to sort of be more strategic in our choices, right? So for what we do, and now I'm thinking at the university in particular, right? So if we just don't talk generally anymore, but like here, how can we take the general concepts and apply them collectively, right? So if we do have a big team of people and we say we want to get going, what would we need to know before we can make really good choices?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'll try to answer it anyways, and then you tell me if that was the question. So if you ask me, so how would we do that? If I were to set up a team now to, oops, wrong side, to do something like that at the university with this, yeah, something like that. Is that the question?
But particularly don't burn out.
Yeah, all of them.
Not
sorry,
about burnout,
the wrong
I
side.
think.
No. That one, wrong side. That one. I meant.
Okay.
That one, yes.
That one? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that how would I try to do that analytically? I would try to bring together a couple of people ideally from different areas of the organization, also from the central services, researchers, people more in teaching, who are really dedicated to the topic, and team up, and then really try to, it's not necessarily on this slide, but on the choose your battles wisely with the question, okay, where is actually the impact of the organization that we want to change, right? And for me personally, it's in especially the teaching. So what, for example, to speak for business students, do we still want to teach competition and infinite growth and capitalism as the only option we have, or do we want to teach something more, some other alternatives so students can critically reflect on those things? So for me it would probably be teaching and also research, but I would say even more teaching. And then I would say, okay, what would be a good way? And then with being strategic, either look, okay, is that already in our mission statements, and if yes, what is written there exactly, and then how can we find opportunities to change things, right? For example, would we then start with all I give an example again from my area, to look at all the business courses we are teaching and see, okay, where do we need to change that? And then, okay, how do we do that? Where, in which groups do we have to be included in order to make those arguments? So who do we need to get on board? That would be probably the program directors and maybe the vice dean of education in that case. And then we would say, okay, maybe there is an opportunity because a minor has to be replaced or has to be changed anyway. So I'm here to help, right? So I would like to help you there. Then using the arguments to persuade people, either with increasing student numbers, for example, or being the most entrepreneurial university, or whatever. So whatever people want, and then try to, from there, grow it, for example, to other programs, stuff like that. And then don't burn out. So that's that's the last recommendation. Is that about? Was that more or less what you were asking?
Yeah, really helpful. But I think so. As you've been working here for 3 years,
Yeah.
we have a committee for everything,
Yeah.
right? So I'm just curious about how you get then the people in that committee.
How
Right?
to get the people into the committee.
Recognizing that people are very selective with their time. Again, very
Yeah.
analytical people, and
Yeah.
they want to make a change.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, I want to join your thing, but maybe I could be better served elsewhere, right? And
Yeah.
I'm just curious about how we can have those conversations with each other. So whereas I can maybe disagree with you that, you know, education is the best way to create impact
Yeah.
at the UT, but still support you, right?
Yeah.
So I find that for me that's a really challenging topic, whereas we all want to be the best, right? Like my solution is better than your
Yeah.
solution. And so I'm going to do my thing, and it's better
Yeah.
than your thing.
Yeah, I think that's important, that the team who is really working together is really focusing on the common goal, right? So if that is not there, and if people would want to do that in order to advance their own careers or stuff like that, then it's probably not going to work. So you really need people who are dedicated to the topic and to do it for the sake of the topic, and not necessarily to put it then on LinkedIn and say, I had this nice idea and I wanted to be in that committee or stuff like that. So it's difficult, but I think you need to bring together. That's also what we discuss a bit in the book, because you touch upon this difference of ideas. So we argue that it's good to have heterogeneity, so really people from different areas, but not too heterogeneous at the beginning, otherwise it won't work, because otherwise you have all those controversies that you mentioned. So you're perfectly right with that.
What's also in your book is that the way to convince people is not necessarily by facts, by graphs, by figures, but by speaking to the heart, by telling stories. So I was wondering, which is the most inspiring story you want to share with us right now at the end of this lecture?
Which is the most inspiring?
The most inspiring story for us.
Yeah, okay, so I have to think about it, but without thinking, I will just tell the story with which we open also the book, which is about a student employee who studied, I think, something like mechanical engineering, and he really, during his studies, was very he learned all about sustainability and alternative technologies, and I don't get into the details, but he really thought, okay, now I'm going to the company, I will be a student employee there, and I will change it all and I will apply all my knowledge and whatever. So he thought he would be the engineer who would contribute to a better society through more sustainable technologies. And then he realized that they were doing the business as usual. Some people never heard about sustainability there before. So he started conversations with them during lunch, very gently from his role as a student employee. And he managed, I think, to convince at least one person to reconsider a bit, and that he considered already a success. But what he also did, his job was to create slide decks for managers and everyone who wanted to have slides, and that was his job. And he said he sneaked in sustainability information in all those slide decks. And people were so busy that many times they didn't take them out, and then they just presented the sustainability stuff at all kinds of meetings. So that is really one very inspiring example.
Okay, yes.
So
that's an inspiring story, yes.
Yeah.
A little bit naughty.
It's naughty.
Yes, it's
also,
naughty.
we have this one person who rolled out sustainability trainings for thousands of people in her company, and when trying to convince people to join, she made it sound like the manager wanted it. And we said, what does that mean? You made it sound, well, I told it in a way that they felt that the manager wanted them to do it. It was a white lie, she said. So many people really joined those trainings because of her a little bit naughty actions, right? It can also be a bit playful sometimes. It doesn't have to be very serious. It can also be fun, maybe even.
Well, I told at the beginning that I browsed this book because I only received it this afternoon, and it's a very practical book with a lot of
It's very practical,
naughty
yeah.
things. It's very practical.
It's
So
not
if
very
you want to
theoretical.
change the world or your company
Yeah,
or your own surroundings,
Yeah.
just buy the book. You can do it
I should
right
say
now.
I sell it to you if you want it for the author price. So for the price I pay for it, for 15 euros instead of, I don't know how much, it's like 20 pounds or something. So if you're interested to get it, yeah.
But first, I want to thank you for your lecture and for the speed in which you were telling us so many things. Give a big hand to Barbara.